I didn't plan to stay over. That's the first thing I need to say, because if you'd asked me earlier that day, I would have told you I hate sleeping anywhere that isn't my own bed. I like my routines, my space, my quiet. I'm the kind of person who always says, nah, I'll just head home, even when it's late. But that night, it felt different. It started at the gym. Trevor and I had been training together for a few weeks by then. Not officially, not like we made a plan and stuck to it. It just sort of happened. Same time slot, same equipment, same rhythm. At first, it was just nods, then small talk, then longer conversations between sets. He was easy to talk to in a way that didn't feel forced. You're lifting too fast, he told me the first time we actually spoke. I looked at him, slightly annoyed. I'm lifting fine. He smirked. Yeah, if your goal is to finish early and hate yourself later. I rolled my eyes, but I slowed down. After that, it became a thing. He'd point out small things: form, posture, pacing, and I'd pretend I didn't care, even though I clearly did. Somewhere along the way, we started syncing our workouts without even discussing it. That night, we stayed longer than usual. Last set, he said. You said that 20 minutes ago. Yeah, but this time I mean it. I laughed, dropping the weights. My arms were already shaking. You're actually trying to kill me. Nah, he replied casually. Just trying to make you better. There was something about the way he said it. Not joking, just certain. We finished around 10, way later than I usually stayed. I checked my phone, already picturing the long ride home, the crowded bus, the exhaustion waiting for me the second I sat down. Trevor grabbed his hoodie, pulling it over his head. You heading out? Yeah, I said automatically. Then paused. Probably. He noticed that. You look dead, he said. Thanks. I'm serious, he added. You're gonna pass out on the way home. I shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time. He studied me for a second, then said, just crash at my place. I blinked. What? It's like 5 minutes from here, he said, like it was obvious. Way easier than you dragging yourself across the city. I hesitated. Not because it was a weird offer, it wasn't, not really. People crash at each other's places all the time. But something about it felt loaded. Or maybe I was just overthinking. I don't know, I said. I don't want to inconvenience you. Trevor snorted. You think I'd offer if it was an inconvenience? I looked at him. He held my gaze, steady, waiting. No pressure, he added. Just seems smarter than you falling asleep on public transport. I exhaled slowly. He wasn't wrong. Okay, I said finally. Just for tonight. He nodded once, like that settled it. Cool. The walk to his place was quiet, but not awkward. That's something I noticed about Trevor early on. He didn't rush to fill silence. He just let it exist, like it was part of the conversation too. You live alone? I asked. Yeah, he said. Moved out last year. Nice. What about you? Roommate, I replied. And thin walls. He laughed softly. Yeah, I don't miss that. His apartment was exactly what I expected, and somehow not at all. Clean, but not in a sterile way. Lived in. There were dumbbells in the corner, a hoodie thrown over the back of a chair, a half-empty water bottle on the table. It felt real. Make yourself at home, he said, kicking off his shoes. I stood there for a second, taking it in. You can take the bed, he added. I immediately shook my head. No, I'm not doing that. I'll take the couch. It's not a big deal. It is to me, I said. I'm not stealing your bed. He looked like he was about to argue, then stopped. Fine, he said. But if you wake up with a broken back, that's on you. Noted. He grabbed a blanket and tossed it to me. Our fingers brushed for a second, nothing dramatic. Just brief contact, but I felt it more than I expected. Bathroom's there, he said, nodding toward the hallway. If you need anything. Got it. For a while, we moved around the apartment like we'd done it before. He disappeared into his room to change. I washed my face, tried to ignore how tired I actually was. When I came back, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone. You sure you don't want the bed? He asked again, glancing up. I leaned against the doorframe. You're really not letting this go, huh? He shrugged. Just offering. I smiled faintly. I'm good. There was a pause. Then he said, you pushed hard tonight. Yeah, I replied. Because someone wouldn't let me quit. He smirked. You didn't want to quit. He wasn't wrong. I stepped back. Good night, Trevor. Night, Ian. I lay down on the couch, pulling the blanket over me. My body ached in that satisfying way that comes after a good workout, but my mind was still awake. I could hear him moving in the other room. Not loud, just small sounds shifting, settling. For some reason, it made me feel aware. Not uncomfortable, just aware. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the night. The way he watched me during sets. The way he pushed, but never too far. The way everything with him felt, balanced. At some point, the apartment went completely quiet. I closed my eyes. Told myself I was just staying because I was too tired to go home. That was the reason. That was the only reason. But even then, lying there in the dark, I had this quiet thought I couldn't quite ignore. If it was just about being tired, why did it feel like something had just started? I woke up before him. At first, I didn't even realize where I was. The ceiling looked unfamiliar, the light coming through the window at a slightly different angle than I was used to. For a second, my brain did that thing where it tries to piece everything together too fast. Then it hit me. Trevor's place. The couch. Last night. I shifted slightly, feeling the stiffness in my back exactly where he said I would. I almost laughed to myself. Yeah, okay. You were right. I muttered under my breath. The apartment was quiet. Not dead quiet, just early. That kind of silence where the world hasn't fully started yet. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face, trying to wake up properly. And that's when I noticed his door was open. Not wide. Just enough. I don't know why I looked. Maybe curiosity. Maybe instinct. Trevor was still asleep. Lying on his back, one arm thrown above his head, blanket half slipped down like he'd moved around during the night. He looked completely different like that. Less sharp. Less controlled. Softer somehow. For a second, I just stood there. Watching. Not in a weird way. Just noticing. Then I caught myself. Okay, I whispered. Don't be that guy. I stepped back immediately, turning toward the kitchen instead. Coffee. That was a safe thought. Normal. I found his coffee machine without much effort. He didn't seem like the complicated setup type. A few minutes later, the smell started filling the apartment, grounding me a little. By the time I poured a cup, I heard movement behind me. You're up early. I turned. Trevor was standing there, hair messy, eyes still half asleep, one hand dragging across his face. Yeah, I said. Couldn't really sleep past whatever time this is. He glanced at the clock. 7:12. Yeah, that explains it. He nodded toward the coffee. You made that. Hope that's okay. More than okay, he said, grabbing a mug. We stood there in the kitchen, both waking up in silence for a minute. It wasn't awkward, just slow. How's your back? He asked finally, not even looking at me. I huffed a quiet laugh. Terrible. Told you. Yeah. A small smile pulled at his mouth. Then he looked at me properly. You could have just taken the bed. And deal with you complaining about it all morning? I shot back. Worth it, he said. I shook my head, taking a sip of coffee. It was strong. Exactly how I liked it. Of course it was. We leaned against opposite sides of the counter, the morning light cutting across the space between us. It felt calm. Too calm, maybe. You heading out soon? He asked. I hesitated. Yeah, I said. Probably. But I didn't move. Neither did he. Trevor tapped his fingers lightly against his mug, thinking about something. Then he said, You don't have to rush. I looked at him. I'm not rushing. You kind of are, he replied. Ian, he corrected gently. Right. Ian, he repeated, like he was testing how it sounded in that moment. Something about the way he said my name slower than usual, more intentional, made it land differently. I cleared my throat. I just don't want to overstay. You're not. Simple as that. No hesitation. I nodded slowly, looking down at my cup. Okay. Another pause. Then, casually, like it didn't mean anything, he asked, You hungry? I glanced up. A little. I've got stuff for breakfast, he said. Nothing fancy. That's fine. He moved around the kitchen easily, like this was his natural rhythm. Grabbing things, setting them down, not overthinking any of it. I watched him for a second longer than I probably should have. Something on my face? He asked without looking. I blinked. What? You're staring. I'm not, I stopped. Okay, maybe a little. He smirked. Why? I shrugged, trying to play it off. Just didn't picture you as the cooking type. I don't cook, he said. I assemble. That tracks. We both smiled at that. He handed me a plate a few minutes later. Nothing special. Eggs, toast. But it felt oddly intentional. Like this wasn't just about food. We sat at the small table across from each other. For a while, we just ate. Then Trevor said, You're quieter today. I shrugged. Just tired. He didn't push. But I could feel him noticing. That same way he did at the gym, small things, subtle shifts. You thinking about something? He asked after a minute. I hesitated. Not really, I said. That wasn't true. I was thinking about how normal this felt, and how it probably shouldn't. Trevor leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me. You sure? He asked. Yeah, I said, softer this time. He held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded. All right. But something in the air shifted. Not tense, just aware. After we finished eating, I stood up first. I should go, I said. Trevor didn't immediately respond. He stayed seated, watching me. Yeah, he said eventually. If you want. If you want. Not you should. Not yeah. Makes sense. Something about that made me pause. I've got stuff to do, I added, like I needed to justify it. He nodded. Of course. I grabbed my things, moving a little slower than necessary. At the door, I slipped my shoes on, then glanced back at him. Thanks, I said, for letting me crash. No problem. Another pause. Then he added, you can do it again, you know. My chest tightened slightly. Yeah, I asked. Yeah, he said simply. Anytime. I nodded, holding his gaze for a second. Okay. I opened the door, stepping out into the hallway. But right before I left, he said my name again. Ian. I turned. Yeah. He looked like he was about to say something else. Then he shook his head slightly. Text me when you get home, he said instead. I blinked. Okay. I left after that. But the whole way home, one thought kept repeating in the back of my mind. I hadn't stayed because I was too tired to go home. And now, I wasn't sure I wanted things to go back to how they were before. I told myself it was nothing. That was my first mistake. Because after that night, everything felt slightly off. Not in a bad way, just different enough that I couldn't ignore it. At the gym, we fell back into our routine. Same time, same machines, same rhythm. But now I noticed things I hadn't before. The way Trevor would glance at me between sets, not long, not obvious, just enough. The way he'd stand a little closer when correcting my form. The way he'd say my name like it meant something more than just getting my attention. Ian, slow it down, he said one evening, hand hovering near my arm. I did. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. You're doing it again, he added. Doing what? Thinking too much. I exhaled through a small smile. You always this observant. Only when it matters. That stayed with me longer than it should have. We finished late again. Not as late as the first time, but enough that the familiar thought crept back in. The ride home, the exhaustion, the option I now knew existed. Trevor grabbed his bottle, taking a sip before looking at me. You heading out? He asked. There it was. Simple question. Same as last time. But it didn't feel the same. I hesitated. Yeah, I said, but slower this time. He nodded, like he expected that. Cool. That was it. No follow-up. No, you can stay. No push. And somehow, that made it worse. We walked out of the gym together, stepping into the cool night air. At the corner where we usually split, I stopped. Trevor kept walking for half a step before realizing. He turned. You good? Yeah, I said quickly, then paused. You sure I wouldn't be in the way? I added. His brow furrowed slightly. Of what? Like if I stayed again. There was a beat. Then he huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Ian, he said, stepping a little closer. You wouldn't be in the way. Okay. I replied, softer now. Another pause. Then he asked, you want to stay? Not offering. Asking. That difference hit harder than I expected. I swallowed. Yeah, I said. This time, it wasn't about being tired. And we both knew it. Back at his place, everything felt familiar, but sharper. Like I was noticing the details now. The way his hoodie was still thrown over the same chair. The way he moved around the space like it was second nature. The way I didn't feel like a guest anymore. You're taking the bed this time, he said, already heading toward his room. I laughed lightly. You're still on that? Yes, he replied without hesitation. I'm not. You are. He cut in, glancing back at me. I'm not arguing about it again. I raised an eyebrow. You always this stubborn? Only when I'm right. I shook my head, but I didn't fight it this time. Fine. Good. He tossed me a clean shirt. If you want something more comfortable. Our fingers brushed again. Longer this time. Not by accident. I felt it. So did he. Neither of us said anything. Later, I sat on the edge of his bed, pulling the shirt over my head. It smelled like him. Not in an overwhelming way. Just familiar. I stared down at my hands for a second, grounding myself. Relax, I muttered quietly. It's just a shirt. A knock on the doorframe pulled me out of it. Trevor leaned there, arms crossed loosely. You good? He asked. Yeah, I said. Just getting used to your dictatorship. He smirked. You'll survive. He stepped inside, slower this time. More aware. You don't have to overthink this, he added. I looked up at him. I'm not. You are, he said calmly. I let out a small breath. Okay, maybe a little. He nodded like that made sense. Then, after a pause, he said, you don't have to leave early tomorrow either. There it was again. That subtle way he gave me space to choose. Yeah, I asked. Yeah. I held his gaze. Okay. We didn't go to sleep right away. That was new. Last time, everything had felt like a quick stop. A temporary thing. This time, we stayed in the same room. Talking. About nothing important. And somehow, everything important. You always this quiet outside the gym? He asked, sitting across from me. Depends, I said. On the person. And with me. I hesitated. Still figuring that out. He nodded slowly. Fair. A pause. Then he added, you don't seem uncomfortable. I'm not. Another pause. Then, quieter, just aware. His expression shifted slightly. Of what? I met his eyes. You. Silence. Not awkward. Just full. Trevor leaned back slightly, processing that. Good or bad, he asked. Good, I said immediately. Then, softer, just new. He nodded. Yeah, he said. Same. That surprised me. You? I asked. He gave a small shrug. I don't usually invite people into my space like this. My chest tightened slightly at that. Why me then? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at me. Steady. Then he said, because I wanted to. Simple. No over-explanation. No deflection. Just truth. And somehow, that hit harder than anything else. At some point, the conversation slowed. Not because we ran out of things to say, because we didn't need to keep talking. Trevor shifted slightly closer. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the change. You tired? He asked. A little. Then sleep, he said. I nodded. But neither of us moved right away. There was this moment. Quiet. Balanced. Like we were both waiting to see if the other would break it. I lay back first. He turned off the light. The room fell into darkness. I could hear him settle beside me, not too close, not too far. Just there. My heart was louder than it should have been. You good? He asked softly. Yeah. A beat. Then, without thinking too much about it, I said, I'm glad I stayed. There was a small pause. Then, me too. I didn't fall asleep immediately. Not because I was uncomfortable. Because I was aware of everything. The quiet. The space between us. The fact that it didn't feel strange anymore. And somewhere in the middle of all that, one thought settled in my chest, clear and undeniable. This wasn't about being tired anymore. And whatever this was, it wasn't casual. I woke up to the sound of movement. Not loud. Just enough to pull me out of sleep slowly instead of all at once. For a second, I stayed still, eyes closed, letting my brain catch up. Then I remembered. Trevor's bed. Trevor's apartment. Trevor, right next to me. My eyes opened. The room was dim, early morning light barely slipping through the curtains. Trevor was sitting on the edge of the bed, back to me, pulling on a shirt. For a moment, I just watched. It felt strangely calm. No panic. No, what did I do? No awkwardness crashing in. Just awareness. You're staring again, he said, without turning around. I let out a quiet breath. You always know? Yeah. I pushed myself up slightly, leaning back against the headboard. That's annoying. He huffed a small laugh, finally glancing over his shoulder. You sleep okay? He asked. Better than on your couch, I said. Told you. I shook my head, but I was smiling. There was a pause. Then he turned fully, facing me now. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. That same feeling from last night lingered, something unspoken, but present. You heading out early again? He asked. I hesitated. Last time I had. This time, I don't have to, I said. He nodded once. Okay. That was it. No reaction. But I noticed the way his shoulders relaxed slightly. We moved through the morning slower than before. No rush. No unspoken pressure to leave. Trevor made coffee again. I leaned against the counter, watching him without pretending I wasn't this time. You're doing it on purpose now, he said. Maybe. He glanced at me, a small smirk pulling at his mouth. Why? I shrugged lightly. Because you don't seem to mind. I don't, he said. Direct. Always like that. I nodded, taking that in. Breakfast happened the same way as the day before. Simple. Easy. But this time, the quiet between us felt fuller. not empty space. Something building. At one point, our knees brushed under the table. Neither of us moved away. That was new. You're not talking much, he said after a while. Neither are you. Yeah, he admitted. I looked at him. What are you thinking about? He held my gaze for a second. Same thing you are, probably. My chest tightened slightly. And what's that? Another pause. Then, calmly, that this isn't just about crashing after the gym anymore. There it was. Out loud. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, I said. It's not. Silence followed. Not awkward. Just real. Later, we ended up back in his room. Not intentionally. It just happened. I was sitting on the edge of the bed again, scrolling through my phone, not really paying attention. Trevor leaned against the wall across from me, arms crossed loosely. You always this hard to read, he asked. I looked up. What do you mean? You don't say things unless you really mean them, he said. But you also don't say a lot. I smirked slightly. And you're trying to figure me out? Yeah. Why? He didn't hesitate. Because I want to know what this is. My heartbeat picked up. I set my phone down. And what do you think it is? I asked. He pushed off the wall, stepping closer. I think, he said slowly, that if I don't ask, we're both just gonna keep pretending this is casual. I let out a quiet breath. He wasn't wrong. I don't think it's casual, I admitted. His eyes stayed on mine. Good, he said. Another step closer. Not touching, but close enough that the space between us felt intentional. Because I don't treat it like that, he added. I noticed. A small pause. Then he asked, quieter now, do you want it to be? The question landed heavy. Simple, but not easy. I shook my head slightly. No. His shoulders dropped just a fraction, like he'd been holding tension he didn't show. Okay, he said. Just that. No dramatic reaction. Just acceptance. We stood there for a second. Then Trevor reached out slow, deliberate, and took my hand. Not sudden. Not overwhelming. Just steady. I didn't pull away. I didn't even hesitate. You good? He asked quietly. Yeah. I meant it. Our fingers stayed like that, loosely intertwined. It felt grounding, like everything we hadn't said, yet was sitting right there between us. I don't rush things, he said after a moment. I can tell. But I also don't ignore them, he added. I nodded. Same. He looked at me, searching, like he was making sure I actually meant that. I'm not looking for something complicated, he continued. Just something real. That's not complicated, I said. It can be, he replied. Fair. I stepped a little closer. Not breaking the contact. Just closing the distance. Then let's not make it complicated, I said. His grip tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to feel. Okay. The rest of the day felt different. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because everything was clearer. We didn't pretend anymore. Didn't act like this was just convenience or timing or too tired to go home. When we sat on the couch, we sat closer. When we talked, we didn't filter things the same way. At one point, I caught myself just watching him again. You're doing it, he said. Yeah. Still not gonna explain? I shook my head slightly. Then, after a second, I just like being here. That made him pause. Actually pause. Then he nodded, slower this time. Good, he said. I didn't leave that day. Not in the morning. Not in the afternoon. By evening, it wasn't even a question anymore. You staying? He asked casually. I looked at him. Yeah. No hesitation this time. No excuse. Just the truth. He nodded once, like that was exactly what he expected. All right. That night felt different from the others. Not because something big happened. Because nothing felt uncertain anymore. We were in the same space again. Same room. Same quiet. But this time, it wasn't new. It was chosen. I lay down first. Trevor turned off the light, then settled beside me. Closer than before. Still not overwhelming. Just intentional. After a minute, he said softly, Ian. Yeah. I meant what I said earlier. About what? That I don't ignore things. I turned my head slightly toward him in the dark. I know. A pause. Then, quieter. I don't want to mess this up. My chest tightened slightly. You won't, I said. You don't know that. I know you're not pretending, I replied. That mattered more. Silence settled again. Then, after a moment, I said, I don't want this to go back to how it was before. He didn't answer immediately. Then, it won't. Simple. Certain. And for the first time since all of this started, I believed it. It didn't feel like a third night. That's the strange part. If you'd asked me to label it first time staying over, second time, whatever, I probably could have. But it didn't feel like separate moments anymore. It felt like something that had just continued. like I hadn't really left. I woke up before my alarm again, but this time I didn't move right away. Trevor was still asleep beside me, closer than the night before. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth from him without even trying. I stayed still, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle. This felt normal. That thought hit me harder than anything else so far. Not intense, not overwhelming, just normal. And that was new. You're awake. His voice was low, still rough from sleep. Yeah, I said. I turned my head slightly. His eyes were open now, watching me. You always wake up this early? He asked. Yeah, habit. He nodded, like that made sense. Neither of us moved for a few seconds. Then he said, You didn't leave this time. I huffed a quiet breath. No, I should probably go at 7 a.m. Not today. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. Good. We stayed in bed longer than we needed to. Not sleeping. Just there. Talking a little. Falling quiet. Talking again. At one point, Trevor shifted onto his side, facing me more directly. You've been thinking less, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You tracking that now? Yeah. Creepy. He ignored that. What changed? He asked. I thought about it. Then said, honestly, I stopped trying to figure out what this is supposed to be. And now I'm just letting it be what it is. He watched me for a second, then nodded. Yeah, he said. That's better. Eventually, we got up. The routine was already there now. Coffee. Breakfast. Small comments that didn't feel small anymore. You're getting comfortable here, he said at one point, watching me open a cabinet without asking. I glanced at him. That a problem? No, he said immediately. Just noticing. I nodded, closing the cabinet. Yeah, I said. I am. There was no awkwardness in admitting that. That was new too. We ended up back at the gym later that day. That part didn't change. At least, not on the surface. Same weights. Same structure. But everything underneath it felt different. More aware. More connected. Focus, Trevor said, tapping the bar lightly. I am focused. You're not. I exhaled. Okay, maybe I'm a little distracted. He smirked. By what? I looked at him. Didn't answer. Didn't need to. His expression shifted slightly. Yeah, he said. Same. That was it. And somehow, that said everything. After the workout, we didn't even have the usual conversation anymore. No, you heading out? No pause at the corner. We just walked back to his place. Together. Like it was already decided. Inside, everything felt even more natural now. I dropped my bag in the same spot as before without thinking. Trevor noticed. Yeah, he said quietly, almost to himself. What? I asked. Nothing. But he was watching me differently. Not confused. Not unsure. Just recognizing something. That evening, we ended up sitting on the couch. Closer than before. Not by accident. My shoulder brushed his. Stayed there. Neither of us moved away. You ever do this? I asked. Do what? This, I said. Let something just happen like this. He shook his head slightly. No. Why? He thought for a second. Then, I usually decide things before they get this far. And this time, he looked at me. I didn't want to decide. That hit. Harder than it should have. Yeah, I said quietly. Me neither. There was a pause. Then Trevor shifted slightly, turning toward me more. Not closing the distance completely. Just enough. You okay with where this is going? He asked. Direct. Always like that. I met his eyes. Yeah. No doubts. I shook my head. Not about this. That seemed to matter to him. He nodded once. Good. Then, softer. Because I'm not doing this halfway. I know. I don't want this to be something that just fades out, he added. It won't, I said. You don't know that. I know I'm not treating it like that, I replied. That was the truth. He held my gaze for a second longer, then reached for my hand again. Like it was natural now. Because it was. Later that night, back in his room, the quiet felt different again. Not heavy, not uncertain, just settled. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. Trevor turned off the light, then moved beside me. Closer, not hesitant. Ian, he said quietly. Yeah. You ever think about how fast this happened? I let out a small breath. Yeah. And I turned my head slightly toward him. It doesn't feel fast. He was quiet for a second. Then, yeah, he said. It doesn't. Silence again. Comfortable. Then I said something before I could overthink it. I don't want to go back to just seeing you at the gym. There. Out loud. No taking it back. Trevor didn't respond immediately. Then he shifted slightly closer. I wasn't planning on that, he said. My chest tightened this time in a good way. Good. A few minutes passed. Then he added, softer. You staying tomorrow too? I didn't hesitate. Yeah. No excuse. No, I'm too tired. No pretending. Just the truth. Okay, he said. And I could hear it in his voice. That mattered to him. As I closed my eyes that night, one thing became clear. This wasn't accidental anymore. Not the staying. Not the way we looked at each other. Not the way everything kept continuing. And the more it settled in, the more I realized something else. I didn't stay because I was too tired to go home. I stayed because I didn't want to leave him. At some point, it stopped feeling like I was staying over. That realization hit me in the smallest, most random way. I was brushing my teeth in Trevor's bathroom, half asleep, wearing his shirt again, and I reached for a drawer without thinking, just opened it like I already knew what was inside. And I did. I paused for a second, toothbrush in my mouth, staring at my own reflection. Okay, I muttered quietly. When did this happen? Because this wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't just for tonight. This was something else. When I walked back into the room, Trevor was sitting on the bed, pulling on his hoodie. You're thinking again, he said immediately. I rolled my eyes. You're obsessed with that. You make it obvious. I leaned against the wall. I was just realizing something. Dangerous. Yeah, probably. He looked up at me, waiting. I hesitated, then said it anyway. It doesn't feel like I'm staying over anymore. Silence. Not awkward. Just real. Trevor didn't look surprised. Yeah, he said. That was it. No denial. No pretending. Just agreement. I exhaled slowly, like something had just settled into place. Okay, I said. We didn't talk about it more than that. We didn't need to. Because after you say something like that out loud, you can't really go back. At the gym, people started noticing. Not in an obvious way, just small things. You two always train together now? One guy asked casually. Trevor didn't even hesitate. Yeah. No explanation. No weird energy. Just yeah. I felt something shift in my chest when he said that. Not big. Just steady. Later, during a break between sets, I sat down next to him. You don't hide things, do you? I asked. He glanced at me. Like what? Like this. He shrugged slightly. I don't see a reason to. That's it. That's it. I studied him for a second. You make it sound easy. It is easy, he said. If you don't overcomplicate it. I huffed a quiet laugh. Right? Of course. He nudged my knee lightly with his. Stop thinking, he said. Not happening. He smirked. I'll work on it. That night, back at his place, our place, I caught myself thinking before I corrected it, we didn't even acknowledge the routine anymore. It just existed. I dropped my keys next to his. Sat on the couch like I always did. Grabbed water without asking. Trevor watched me for a second, then said, You're fully settled now. I looked at him. You sound surprised. I'm not, he said. Just noticing. Again with the noticing. Yeah. I shook my head, but I was smiling. We ended up sitting close again. Closer than before. Not even a question anymore. At one point, I leaned back slightly, my shoulder pressing into his. He didn't move. Just adjusted slightly so it felt right. You ever think about how this looks from the outside? I asked. Not really. Why not? He turned his head slightly toward me. Because I care more about what it feels like from here. That landed deep. I didn't respond right away. Didn't need to. A little later. The conversation shifted. Not light anymore. Not surface level. Do you stay at your place at all? He asked. I hesitated. Not really. How long has it been? I thought about it. A few days. He nodded slowly. You going back? There was no pressure in his voice. Just a question. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. I don't know, I admitted. Silence. Then, you don't have to figure that out right now, he said. I glanced at him. You sure? Yeah. He leaned back, relaxed. We're not rushing anything. That word again. We. Something about that stuck. Later that night, in his room, things felt quieter than usual. Not in a bad way. Just heavier. Like we both knew we were crossing into something deeper. I sat on the edge of the bed again, but this time I didn't feel like I was visiting. Trevor stood in front of me, closer than usual. You okay? He asked. Yeah. You seem somewhere else. I exhaled slowly. I think I'm just realizing this is real. He didn't look confused. Yeah, he said. That doesn't freak you out? I asked. No. Why not? He thought for a second. Then, because I've known that for a while. I looked up at him. What? He held my gaze. You think I let people stay like this if I wasn't sure? That hit hard. I swallowed. No, I said quietly. I guess not. He stepped closer. Close enough that I didn't have to look up as much. I don't do temporary, he added. I'm not looking for temporary either, I said. Good. A pause. Then, softer. Then don't treat it like it is. I nodded. I won't. He reached for my hand again. At this point, it felt natural. Expected. I stood up slowly, closing the small distance between us. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just intentional. You're still thinking, he said quietly. Yeah. About what? I looked at him. About how this started because I was too tired to go home. A small smile pulled at his mouth. Yeah, he said. And now, he asked. I didn't hesitate this time. Now I just don't want to leave. His grip on my hand tightened slightly. Good. That night, lying next to him, closer than ever before, I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel like I needed to question anything. Because at some point, this stopped being something accidental. Stopped being something temporary. Stopped being something I needed to explain to myself. And as I closed my eyes, one thought settled in, clear and steady. I didn't stay because I was too tired. I stayed because I'd already chosen him. The first night I went back to my own apartment felt wrong. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing was broken. Nothing had changed physically. My room was exactly how I left it, same bed, same desk, same quiet. But it didn't feel like mine in the same way anymore. I stood in the middle of it for a while, keys still in my hand, just looking around like I was trying to reconnect with something. This is weird, I muttered, because it shouldn't have been. I hadn't moved out. I hadn't planned anything. And yet, something had shifted. Trevor texted me first. Trevor, you get home? I stared at the message for a second before replying. Me, yeah? A few seconds later. Trevor, feels quiet? I let out a small breath. Me, yeah? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then, Trevor, come back. I didn't even sit down. I grabbed my keys again before I could think too much about it. That was the difference now. I didn't need a reason. I didn't need an excuse. I just went. When he opened the door, he didn't look surprised. You lasted long, he said. Shut up, I replied, stepping inside. But I was smiling. He closed the door behind me, slower this time. More aware. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. It just didn't feel right there. He nodded like he understood completely. Yeah, he said. I figured. We didn't overtalk it. Didn't analyze it. I dropped my keys in the same place again. Sat down like I always did. And just like that, everything felt right again. Later, sitting on the couch, I looked at him. You knew I'd come back, I said. He didn't even try to deny it. Yeah. Why? He leaned back slightly, relaxed. Because you weren't staying here out of convenience, he said. You were staying because you wanted to. I exhaled slowly. Yeah. That was the simplest truth of all of this. A few days passed like that. Back and forth technically, but not really. Because most of my time was still at his place. And it stopped feeling temporary completely. It wasn't I'll stay again. It was just where I was. One evening, after the gym, we were walking back like usual when Trevor said, You ever gonna bring your stuff over? I looked at him. You asking me to move in? He shrugged slightly. I'm asking if you're tired of pretending you haven't already. That caught me off guard. I let out a small laugh. You don't do things halfway, do you? No. I nodded slowly. I noticed. We kept walking for a few seconds. Then I said, I think I'm already there. He glanced at me. Yeah. Yeah. And that was it. No big moment. No dramatic decision. Just truth catching up with what was already happening. That night, back at his place, I brought it up again. Not because I needed to. Because I wanted to say it clearly. I'm not going back to staying there, I said. Trevor looked at me. Not surprised. Not overwhelmed. Just steady. Okay, he said. You sure? Ian, he replied, stepping a little closer. I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't. That grounded something in me. Okay. We stood there for a second. Then I added, quieter. I don't want this to turn into something we overthink. It won't, he said. You promise that? He looked at me. I don't promise things I can't keep, he said. But I know what this is. And what is it? A small pause. Then, real. Simple. Like everything with him. That night felt different again. Not because anything changed. Because everything settled. I wasn't staying over. I wasn't crashing because I was too tired. I wasn't even thinking about leaving anymore. I was just there. With him. Where I wanted to be. Lying in bed, I turned slightly toward him. You know what's funny? I said quietly. What? This all started because I didn't want to take the bus home. He let out a low laugh. Yeah. I smiled slightly. I told myself it was just because I was too tired. And now, he asked. I didn't hesitate. Now I just don't want to be anywhere else. He didn't respond right away. Then, softly, good. We lay there in the quiet. No tension. No questions left unanswered. Just certainty. And as I closed my eyes, one final thought settled in clearer than anything else. I didn't stay because I was too tired to go home. I stayed because being with Trevor felt like home.